Alright, so today we're going to talk about what it means to practice functionally. And when we're talking about practicing functionally, we're specifically talking about practicing forms or kata functionally. Now, in Kung Fu, forms are a very big part of our practice. And if we're practicing them, there are a multitude of reasons why. But if we're practicing them for self-defense purposes or even for sport purposes, it's important that we understand how those movements are used and how they are supposed to be structured in a sense. So you're going to see in the videos that the traditional videos, the old masters practicing, they are most likely performing for show, but I've seen this at my own Kung Fu school when I was training, and in competition, and in videos on YouTube. Everywhere I go, I see people practicing forms the same way consistently. And I guess that's a good thing, in that there is a degree of consistency, which means we're all practicing right as the tradition would have it, but I believe that we can improve on it. And I know I'm going to get arguments against this, but my biggest point to support my objective is this. There are so many different branches of martial arts. And if we're talking about Kung Fu specifically, there's hundreds of styles. There's Hung Gar, Lao Ga, Mok, Choi, Li, Wing Chun, Praying Mantis. There's like 5 different styles of Praying Mantis. There's Eagle Claw, there's Monkey, there's Southern Monkey, there's Long Fist, there's Northern Shaolin, and the list goes on and on and on and on. Why are there so many styles? Because somebody received some information, said, yes, this is good, but it could be better. Or yes, this can work for some people, but it doesn't work for me. Or yes, it works one way, but I think it works better this way. So when we have traditional martial arts, it's important to honor the tradition to an extent. I believe that saying that we have at the Shaolin Temple, the moves have been the same for over 1,000 years to make the world a better place. I am so much more focused on the latter part of that statement, on the making the world a better place part, than keeping the moves the same for another couple thousand years. We need to improve. We need to adapt. And by no means am I saying we're going to change these moves and you're going to become the best fighters in the history of fighters. Now, if you want to be a fighter, you need to fight. That's first and foremost. But if we can gear our form training to feel more like fighting, we are so much more likely to use those movements in sports or in self-defense. When movements are repeated, they are considered important, because why do them more than once if they're not that significant? So the movement here with the uppercuts. My biggest caveat when I see the old masters do it is that block is way out. And this has minimal support. So if something's incoming, this is just going to get knocked down. Second, those uppercuts out here, I'd argue the same thing, in that uppercuts that aren't tight and connected to your body, they're not going to do much. Now, we're going to take a look at the modifications that were made to improve on that technique. Here it is. Now, you can see the difference in that this block is way tight, right? It's not out here where there's this big space. It's in tight and actually protecting my head. Now, the uppercuts follow that same pattern in that they are in tight. They're more connected with my back muscles, with my chest, with my shoulder, so that upon impact, I'm actually delivering. I'm not just hollow, if you will. Then the other thing too is that last punch. So you do the 2 uppercuts punch, then here. What changes is the position of your head. So if I'm at this punch here, when I go to this one, I move my head out of the way. Now that serves a clear function, in that if something's incoming, I'm just moving out the way and throwing, right? Now, again, it's better to practice with live resistance. But practicing your forms like this is going to ingrain these ideas in your head and in your body, so you're more likely to respond appropriately, or at least respond more efficiently than you would if you're just practicing these very square movements. Now we're going to take a look at a movement from Gungji. So I always take issue when I see most people do this move because this is a power-based move. You know, it's not a redirection in the sense that you're thinking like you would see in like Tai Chi or something. That initial back fist, the explained function is that it's knocking down somebody's guard to clear room for that hook to come across. But if I'm just doing this, this swing here has minimal power. That hook doesn't have as much force as it could to maximize the amount of damage you can do. So you'll see when I come down, I come A at an angle, and B, I'm using my whole body and putting it into it to maximize the strength applied. Now, there's a lot of problems with that move in my perspective because you're completely open, right? You're swinging, you're putting your whole weight and body into it, and all this is open. So to stay here is a mistake, right? Your head needs to move. So when I say changing the movement, sometimes it's as simple as changing the positioning of your head. Because in Kung Fu, and you can see this in, I'd say most styles, from Northern Shaolin to Wing Chun, their movement is very stationary. You don't move your head. So your head is a consistent target because it's always in the same place. Whereas boxers, they'll have head movement. They'll move out the way. And it makes their head a harder target to hit. So for that movement, if I'm pulling back and covering, my head's back here. When I do my punch, my head's forward, which is still vulnerable. So on my next movement, that uppercut, I move it back. Now the reason we tap here is usually to imply that we're grabbing or redirecting something. So if I'm here and something's coming in, I might block or punch, and that's also going to be relative to which punch my opponent's doing. Because if they're punching and I can be on the outside when I block, that's better. If they're punching in a way that's going to leave me on their inside, I'd rather just cover and retreat this way. And the same thing applies to that uppercut in that, yes, it is out. So when in use, when you're pulling in, when you're retreating, keep it in tight. And you'll see that in my video too. The movement itself, because it's at a side, it tends to be a little bit more extended for the form's sake. But even in my video, it's a little tighter than what you see in that they have like a perfect 90-degree angle in the old forms. Okay, so we've seen the techniques, we've seen the old way, we've seen the new way. The old way, I think, is a great template. I think it teaches an idea, but we need to expand on that idea. So what I mean by saying we need to practice in a way that's more functional, what that translates to is we need to practice the root or the core of our practice in a way that emulates its function. So Kung Fu is very form heavy, So if we're practicing so many forms, we have these in-depth systems. We need to be able to learn how to use it. If not, then we're just performers, and that's okay. Because not everybody wants to be able, not everybody's training for self-defense. Not everybody's training for sport. So if your intended practice is for health, wellness, and just because it's fun, cool. That's more power to you. That's beautiful. I love that. But if we want to learn how to use these moves in a way that promotes self-defense so that in the event that I'm accosted, I can protect myself, then we should gear our forms to suit that practice. We should adjust our forms to suit that practice. Otherwise, we're just practicing flashy movements. There's definitely going to be more to come on this subject because there are so many styles, there are so many techniques, there are so many moves, and so much of it can be modified or improved or drilled a certain way that helps to give people an idea of what to look for. All right, so next on the to-do list, we're going to take a look at Gungji next Friday. Gungji is considered to be like the first Hung Gar form, at least that's what I was taught. and it is very lengthy, so we're not going to cover the whole thing. We're going to take a few pieces, and I'm going to do my best to explain their function. I particularly want to look at the movements that are a little bit more ambiguous, in that an outsider watching it is not going to say, hey, that technique is for X, Y, and Z. And I'd argue that most traditionalists probably don't even know what it's for, because I've never seen anybody explain these techniques in a way that makes functional sense. And with that, I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something. And if you have questions, require clarification, or just want to show some support, drop a comment down below. Appreciate you all. See you next time.